Hi everyone, and welcome to this video that puts everything together and so where you can create a complete web application. So let's see where we are. So we have written some code in Next.js that enables us to create a front end, like defines what the user sees, the user interface, defines how the user interacts with our application. So we've done that. And earlier in this course, we created a backend server, so things that can get information about campgrounds and find out what campgrounds are near a particular city, maybe put more additional campgrounds within in our database. So we have all this written. And now what we'd like to do is combine these into one application. So we'd like one kind of website, web application. So we have this Next.js code on the left that defines the user interface, and the code on the right, which defines our backend. So there are many ways we can combine this code. We can just physically combine the code and create one application server executable, so one program running on one computer. That's a solution. It's a reasonable solution. Another solution would be to have things separate. So we'd have one computer in the cloud, one computer server, running our Next.js server, our front-end code, our server that gives front-end code, and another computer server, a server in the cloud that is serving up all the back-end stuff, right? So we have the back-end server there. And some benefit of this is that if our application gets super popular, if a lot of people are using our campground website, we can just spin up additional instances of everything. We can spin up additional instances of our back-end server, our front-end server, whatever matching the need of our program. And one instance of this type of arrangement where we have the front-end server being separate from the back-end server would be using the Zeit program that we've perhaps used before when we were working through that Next.js tutorial. And let me just demo this for you. So we've written some applications in Next.js. We've written that GitHub one, which uses the GitHub API to get information from people. And let's just see how this would work. And perhaps you've already used this. It's very simple. We just say now. And what that's going to do is create a production level of our code and then deploy it on the Zeit website. So it's going to deploy it on that Zeit server. And let's just take a look at that. So we have what we've written. It's running on the web there at Zeit, and it looks really good. So that's a perfectly good solution. Let's try it with something else we wrote. I wrote this campground front end. Let me get to that. And let me just show you what that looks like locally. Okay, let me go there. And here I can search for a particular campground. And I get information, so that works perfectly fine. Let's deploy this to Zeit. So I go now here. Okay, and let me go to that site. Okay, that looks fine. And let me do a search here. I'll search for that same thing I just searched for, Apache Creek. And it doesn't work. It doesn't get Apache Creek. And let's investigate why that is by going into the developer tools. And here we see this error, mixed content. So it requested, we loaded via HTTPS, that's secure HTTP, and it requested an insecure resource, which is the one I was using in my campground. So there's this mismatch between the front end, the Next.js code, which was in HTTPS, and my backend server, which was HTTP. So that's a problem. And one solution would be we'd be running our backend with HTTPS, which I, in a previous video, said was a good idea. But when we're investigating how things work, when we're trying to kind of play with this stuff, it's not so easy to do. So the Zeit method is, although it looks very inviting to do this initial work, has some problems with doing this. So Zeit in itself is a great thing to use, but for our application, when we're just trying to learn, maybe not so great. Another solution or another way of doing this would be to do this, that we would have some Next.js server running, so an application running our Next.js code, and we'd have another application running our backend server. So these would be both on one computer, on one server in the cloud, and we'd have this Nginx reverse proxy server kind of managing the request for these two servers. So the maximum I'm trying to follow in this course is don't do anything stupid. And what I mean by that is this, that there is some ways of teaching, and this would employ expedient means, which would mean that I would teach you stuff that's not quite correct, but the correct method is so complex that I'm teaching you these intermediate steps. So, what I'm teaching you is not quite right, but eventually you'll get to kind of the complete complex thing. And the danger of this is that you'll get stuck on one of these, not quite right things. And, you get out into industry and you're all of a sudden doing something in some stupid way. So my goal here is to find methods to teach that that wouldn't be stupid if you did them in production environment or in a real job or an industry. So that's kind of what I mean by this maximum. I just want to make sure that what I'm teaching, if you use it in industry, no one's going to say, hey, that's completely stupid. They might say we don't do it this way or there's a better way, but at least, we're kind of have a minimum bar to jump over. I don't know if that's the right analogy. All right. So the plan with this approach is, and the approach again is we're going to have two pieces of software, two executables run on two servers in that sense, one running the front end code, one running the back end code, and they're both running on one physical computer. So that's kind of where we're heading. So the plan is we're going to get it working on our development machine. We'll transfer the back end to production. We'll test to make sure that works. And then we'll transfer the front end to production. This is actually a pretty simple thing to do. I'm kind of maybe making it sounding more complex than it needs to be, but that's our kind of goal here. So this is how it works. We're going to have the Next.js server running on port 3000 with the backend server running on port 8080. These are the common ports we've been using throughout. And we can create this thing and just test it. So let me demo that approach. So I'm going to get the one server running on Next.js server port 3000 and one on 8080. So let me switch to my code here. All right, and now I'm in, let me just clear here. So now I'm in a directory that has both my backend code and my front end code. So let me start the backend one first. So I'll do that. Let me just make sure I installed it. All right, and let me get that running. I don't remember what it's called. Server. So this is code I've showed you before. That's just serving up that campground information. All right, so that's running. And now let me get the front end running. Okay. And that's eventually waiting on. All right, so that's on port 3000. Okay, let's see how that works. So here I am at the campground thing at localhost 3000, and I'm going to do a search. Let's go with Three Rivers, I think. And that doesn't work. And let me try saddle. And that doesn't work. So let's investigate why this doesn't work. So I'm going to Developer Tools. So here we're getting this error, access to fetch from origin has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. So let's see what that means. That's this, the CORS policy. CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. Okay, so here's what that CORS simply means. So when we're working with our front end, all this material that's coming here, the picture and everything else, was in the same origin. Maybe it meaning that it's the same web address that all this information is coming from. Cross-origin means that some of the information on the page is coming from another server. So in this case, we have our Next.js server running. That's on port 3000. But we have this backend server that's providing some content, which was on port 8080. So that's the conflict, that some of the information that the page is trying to display is coming from a different origin, hence the term cross-origin. So the backend server needs to handle requests from origins outside its own, but normally this would be blocked. So that's why we're getting this error. Now keep in mind, eventually the architecture we're doing is this one, right, where everything is going through an Nginx reverse proxy server, and we're not going to worry about this, or we're not going to have this error. It's going to be coming from the same origin, the origin of this proxy server. So we're not going to have this problem eventually, but we do right now when we're trying to in development. So that's the idea of CORS, Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So we'll get to CORS in a second, but the one general question you may be asking, well, is how does Nginx know which server to send a request to, right? So Nginx is going to get a request in. Previously, what happened was it just sent that request on to some, JavaScript server we wrote. But in this case, we have two. So how's Nginx going to know which one to send it to? And we're going to solve this problem in this way, but we're going to have a prefix that's common. Like let's say we use /API, and we'll just inform Nginx that if you see a prefix /API, then send it to the backend server, else send it to the Next.js server. So we're going to write a configuration file for Nginx that informs Nginx about this rule. If you see a request that has /API, send it to the backend server, else send it to the front end server. It can be more, it doesn't have to be /API, it could be /backend or whatever you want it to be, but we're going to have a common prefix so we know whether to send it to one server or another. So for example, when we go to http mysite.com, that doesn't have this /API, so we know to send it to the Next.js server to deliver that initial GUI, that front end code. And if that code, that front end code, then sends a person types something in, and then that code uses isomorphic fetch at this site, http mysite.com API info with the argument q equals the key q is saddle, then Nginx knows that starts with API. I'm going to send it to the backend server. So we're going to use this rule to decide where to send these requests, whether it's the backend server or the front end server. So that's the goal. All right, so let's fix the CORS problem, work in development, and move on from there. And let me stop my server and make sure I'm in the backend code. Yes, I am. And the first thing we need to do is we're going to install this package called CORS. That was simple enough. So the first task here is we're fixing that CORS problem so we can work in development. We don't need to do this when we're in production. Now let me open up that backend file. So here I am, the backend, server.js, and this is very simple. We just need to require that CORS package. I think we're becoming expert on this. And I guess I'll do it here. We just need to say to use, for the app to use that package. super simple, and that's it. So the only thing we did was we required the package cores, and then we app use cores. Let's see if that fixes the problem. Okay, that's still running, so now let's give this a shot. And you see we get that information. So it was a relatively simple fix. Now, the second thing I mentioned is for Nginx to distinguish between, should I send this to the front end or should I send it to the back end, was that /API, and that's something we need to change. So let's go ahead and make those modifications to our code. So here was /info, so I'm going to just change that to /API. Whoops. /info. Again, it can be anything. It just needs to be a common prefix. And I have hello, and I have hello there. All right, so those are all the changes I need to make here. So I'm changing every request here to have that common prefix. The front end code is pretty simple. I just need to change my request here, my fetch here, to be /API/info. Okay, so let's see if that works. Get that running again. Just make sure I didn't break anything. Let me just refresh. Oops. Okay, that looks good. Let's try another. I think that was one of them. Cool. All right. So that's working perfectly locally on our development machine. Now let's go ahead and deploy it to at least the back end to our server in the cloud, test it, and then we'll get everything working there. Okay, let me see if I can get that a little bigger. Maybe not. Okay, so I have that complete app there. Okay, in the back end, the front end. So my goal was to get that back end working. Let me just change into that. And let me load in my SQL file. Okay, and that looks good. So let me quit out of that. And I mentioned that we needed to change the Nginx profile or configuration file, and that's that default one. And let me just show you, I ahead of time typed one out that was good, and it's this one. And as you can see here, this one simply says that if the location is /API, use the localhost 8080. So that's going to be this back-end server that we're getting installed. And eventually, if it's anything else, it'll be our front-end server. So let me go ahead and clear that. Cool. So the first thing we need to do is move that default file to its correct location. Or I'll just copy that file, and then I'll restart Nginx. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and then I'll restart. Okay, that should work fine. Okay, the next task is to get that backend server running. So let's do an npm install. And then let's start it with pm2 start server.js. And let's just make sure it's still running and didn't crash. That's always a good thing to do. And let's first try to see if we can get to it from the browser. So it takes a bit of finagling because it's not a secure one. Info saddle. And we got information, so that looks good. And now let's see if it works with our front end that's running on our laptop, on our development machine. So to do that, we need to change it to that address there, that 36195. So let's go ahead and edit our code. That's here in our fetch. Up, I went a little too far. And that's too many HTTPs. Okay. All right, let me fix that. Looks good. Let me save it. All right, and let's see if that works. Hope for the best. Beautiful. So now we have the backend server running in production. Let's do the same with our front end. That's very simple. So we made this change here to the fetch request. And now I'm going to stop this location. Just back up a bit. Git add. I'm just updating my Git repository, Git add front end. Okay, and now let's grab it on the production machine. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Okay, and now I just finished installing, so let's build it. Sweet, and let's get it running. That's PM2. I think that looks good. I always do this just in case something instantly shuts off. Okay, so that looks good. So we have two things running. Now let's see, miracle of miracles, if everything just works as we are predicting it would. So I'm going to go to this page because it has that web address. I'm going to get rid of that API part. Hopefully this will be our front end. And it is. Let me try to find that campground. Apache. Beautiful. So that all works. That's Apache Creek. It works. So here's what we did. So we got a Next.js server working. We showed how to do that in a previous video and with those excellent Next.js tutorials. So we got a front end, a GUI, a user interface for an application. Our previous example was using GitHub. Then we also had a backend server running. We saw how to do this in multiple videos in the past to get the campground information, what's near a campground, where's information about various campgrounds. So what's in a campground. So that's the backend server in Next.js. Next, we used PM2 to start the Next.js server running on port 3000 and the backend server running on port 8080. These are just examples of ports we can use. The next thing we did was we created an Nginx configuration file. This site's available default, which would route traffic in the correct direction, right? So if a request starts with the API, it sends the request to the backend server. If it didn't start with with API, it went to the Next.js server. So that's what we did in a nutshell. I'm hoping you think, hey, this is pretty easy. There's some complex steps perhaps, but really when you look at each individual thing, it's a fairly understandable flow of what we need to do. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.